Hi, hello. Welcome to today's recorded lecture. So this lecture is going to cover chapter 5, which is all about relating to groups. It talks about a lot of different concepts, but in this recorded lecture, I'm only going to be focusing on power. So to begin, let's kind of understand what is power and have a working definition. If you've taken any other communication studies class or a lot of different disciplines, are really interested in power and power dynamics because it is so important and really influences everything. So for us, we're going to be working with these two different definitions of power. The first is the ability to do something or act in a particular way, especially as a faculty or a quality, right? That's like I am empowered to do something. But there's also a different kind of power, and that is the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events. So we're going to mostly focus on the second definition of power and explore what are the different types of power. But before we do that, I want to kind of set the scene a little bit and talk about a really important research experiment that influences how we think about power, and then later I'll relate it to group communication. So maybe you have heard of this experiment. It's rather infamous. It was given in the 1960s at Yale University by a professor researcher called Stanley Milgram. And so this experiment was all about obedience. And really, what they were actually trying to study in this experiment was what happens when you ask people to do something that goes against their morals. So conflicting actions and morals. But because that is kind of difficult to get people to sign up for that and have people willingly do that. What they actually advertised is a study that is learning and whether you learn better by punishment or not. So here's the design experiment. So there's 3 people. There's the teacher, the learner, and the experimenter. So let me give you a visual. So we have the L, T, and E, the learner, teacher, and experimenter. So the experimenter is the one who is running the experiment, obviously. And then the other 2 participants, the learner and the teacher, it seems like they are both average everyday people who just signed up for the experiment, and they brought in 2 people and they randomly assigned them if they were going to be the learner or the teacher. But in actuality, the learner was what they call a confederate, and that is someone who is in on the experiment and they're pretending to be a participant, but really they are not. So they made it seem like it was random, but really it wasn't. And there was only one actual study participant, and that is the teacher. So here's how the experiment went. The teacher had a long list of paired words, and what they were trying to do is test how well the learner could memorize those paired words. So the teacher would first read through the entire list, and then they'd go back to the top and they would read one word, the first word of the pair, and list off 4 different options for the learner to choose what was the one that they had read when they went through the entire list at the beginning. So essentially testing how well the learner retained or memorized the words and could recall them. So they would do this, but every time the learner would guess the wrong paired word, the teacher would administer a shock. So before they even got to this, how they set this up is that everyone went into the room of the learner. So the teacher, the actual participant, saw this person who they thought was a random participant, just like they were, get hooked up to a system that looked like it was going to administer shocks to them. And so the learner, because they are a part of the experiment, as they were getting hooked up to the shock machine, they mentioned, hey, I have a heart condition. Should I be worried about this? And the experimenter assured them, no, the shocks are not going to be comfortable, but they're not dangerous, so don't worry. Then they went back into a separate room. So the teacher and the learner, they could hear each other through the wall, but they could not see each other. And that's really important, that the teacher did not have visual contact with the learner during this. So they read the pair words, they go back, they read the first word, offer 4 different options, solutions, the learner chooses them, gets it right, they move on to the next one. So as they continue on and the learner gets them wrong, as I mentioned, the punishment was a shock. So here I have actual visuals of the shock machine they had in front of them. So the volts went from 15 volts all the way up to 450 in increments of 15. And you can see that there are kind of written cues as to light shock, moderate shock, strong shock, very strong, intense shock. So you could really get a sense of how these shocks are going to impact the learner when they get it wrong. And also you can see the actual announcement for this study. So they continue on, the learner gets it wrong, they get a shock. They continue on, the learner gets another answer wrong. The teacher has to increase the shocks every single time. And the experiment went on until one of 2 things happened. The first is that the teacher objected to giving a shock 4 times, or they administered all the way up to the highest shock value, which is 450, 3 times. That's a lot. So during the course of this progressive shock, at first it's uncomfortable. You can kind of hear the learner in the other room be like, ouch, you know, but then as they continue, it got worse. And it's important to note that the person in the other room was not actually getting shocked, but they were pretending and acting as if they were, up until the point where they were banging on the walls, saying, my heart, can't make it stop, all of those things. And so when the teacher would look at the experimenter and say, I'm hurting them, should I continue on? The experimenter told them, you must go on, they will be fine, really reassuring them that they have to continue. So before Milgram did this experiment, he did an informal survey of some of his colleagues and kind of got their opinion as to how this study would go, how many people would actually do this. And all of his colleagues were in agreement that it would be very few people would actually go all the way up to the 450 shock value, because you could clearly hear that you were hurting someone. And they said anyone who does is a psychopath. Well, they did the experiment and Milgram found a whopping 65% of individuals made it all the way to the highest shock value. 65%. And I think it's important to note that these people have hearts and souls, and that they didn't maybe do it with, like they were objecting. But if they didn't object 4 times, they still had to do it. The experiment still went on. So they, did it with remorse. They probably didn't enjoy doing it, but still they did it. 65% of people made it all the way to the top. And so this can tell us a lot of things about obedience, about authority in particular. But then later on, in 1974, Milgram did the same experiment again, but instead of individuals in the teacher role, he did it with groups. And he found that giving orders to groups allowed for less obedience, which in this case, I would argue less obedience is actually the more ethical option. So they arranged for groups to administer the shocks by adding more teachers to the situation. So people had different roles. The first one read off the words, the second one gave verbal feedback, the third one administered the shocks. And in this group experiment, only 10% of participants were obedient in the situation, meaning they finished the entire experiment and administered the highest shock 3 different times, compared to the 65% in individuals. So here we can see that power influences us everywhere and sometimes against our better judgment. But when there's other people, we can make more ethical decisions. And membership in groups helped participants defy this authority that they thought was hurting another. Again, it's important to note, no one was actually shocked in this experiment, but they didn't know that. So with that in mind, let's talk about power because it matters and it's important. So we're going to talk about social power in groups. So researchers John R. P. French and Bertram Raven in the late 1950s came up with this theory of power bases. They talked about 5 different types of powers, the sum of resources one can use to control and or influence others. So we're going to go through each of these 5 different types of power, and I will provide an example for you. So the first type of power base is reward power. And this is having power based on your ability and based on your power, right, to distribute a recognition. So you're either giving out impersonal rewards, so that can be food, shelter, protection, promotions, wages, rewards, or it can be personal rewards. So like approval, like verbal praise, compliments, smile, liking, acceptance. So here we have an example of reward power coming to you from the movie School of Rock.
All right, let's go! All right, stop. You guys, stop messing around. We got a lot of work to do. Okay, people, pay attention because I do not want to have to fail you.
I thought you didn't believe in grades.
Of course I believe in grades. I was testing you, and you passed. Good work, Summer. 4.5 gold stars for you. Now listen.
So here from this example, the teacher played by Jack Black, he sees some potential defiance from his precocious student. And in order to squash that, he gives out reward power, which in this case is the personal reward. So verbal praise, 5 gold stars to you, Summer, so on and so forth. So the next type of power is coercive power, and this is the power to threaten or punish those who do not comply with requests or demands. And this example comes from the movie Zootopia.
Get your popsicle.
Yeah. What does that mean?
It means I have a lead.
Hey, it's Officer Toot Toot.
Actually, it's Officer Hops, and I'm here to ask you some questions about a case.
What happened, Meter Maid? Did someone steal a traffic cone? It wasn't me. Hey, Carrots, you're gonna wake the baby. I gotta get to work.
This is important, sir. I think your $10 worth of popsicles can wait.
I make $200 a day, Fluff. 365 days a year since I was 12. And time is money. Hop along.
Please just look at the picture. You sold Mr. Otterton a popsicle, right? Do you know him?
I know everybody. And I also know that somewhere there's a toy store missing its stuffed animal. So why don't you get back to your box?
Fine. Then we'll have to do this the hard way.
Did you just boot my stroller?
Nico Swild, you are under arrest.
For what? Hurting your feelings?
Felony tax evasion. Yeah, $200 a day, 365 days a year. Since you were 12, that's 2 decades times 20, which is 1,460,000, I think. I mean, I am just a dumb bunny, but we are good at multiplying. Anyway, according to your tax forms, you reported, let me see here, 0. Unfortunately, lying on a federal form is a punishable offense. 5 years jail time.
Well, it's my word against yours. $200 a day. 365 days a year since I was 12.
Actually, it's your word against yours. And if you want this pen, you're going to help me find this poor missing otter, or the only place you'll be selling popsicles is the prison cafeteria. It's called a hustle, sweetheart.
So here in this example, we have Officer Hops and we have the fox Nick Wilde. So in order to get Nick Wilde to help Officer Fox on her grand adventure, she coerces him by essentially threatening legal action due to tax evasion. So the next type of power we have is called legitimate power, and this is power based on individuals' socially sanctioned claim to a position. So whether that is a status or a rank or a role, that gives the occupant the right to require and demand compliance, excuse me. So here we have an example from the great movie, Remember the Titans.
Which folks? Gary. Parents, are they here? Where are they? That's my mother. That's your mama? Very nice, that one. Take a good look at her. Because once you get on that bus, you ain't got no mama no more. You got your brothers on the team. You got your daddy. Now, you know who your daddy is, don't you? Gary, if you want to play on this football team, you answer me when I ask you, who is your daddy? Who's your daddy, Gary? Who's your daddy? Uh-huh. And whose team is this? Is this your team? Or is this your daddy's team? Yours. Mm-hmm. Get on the bus.
So here in this example, we have Denzel Washington, who is the football coach of the team, talking to one of his players, and he is trying to establish dominance, but doing so through legitimate power because he is the head coach. And in football, the head coach has power to tell the players what to do because of the position, because of the role of being head coach. So the next type of power we have is referent power, and this is power based on group members' identification with, attraction to, or respect for the power holder. So here the person in power doesn't have power necessarily because of a role, because of how they can sue you, but because you like them and because they have charisma. So here's an example of that.
She's the queen bee, the star. Those other two are just her little workers.
Regina George. How do I even begin to explain Regina George? Regina George is flawless. She has 2 Fendi purses and a silver Lexus.
I hear her hair's matured for $10,000.
I hear she does car commercials in Japan. Her favorite movie is Varsity Blues.
One time she met John Stamos on a plane.
And he told her she was pretty. One time she punched me in the face. It was awesome.
So here from this example from the movie Mean Girls, we can see that the ultimate mean girl, Regina George, has this referent power over her peers, over her classmates, because of all of the reasons listed. And so here's the next type of power, and this is expert power. And this is power that is derived from subordinates with the assumption that the power holder possesses a superior skill or an ability. So this is a little bit different from the legitimate power because legitimate power is based on the role that you have and the assumptions that go with that role. This is less based on your role, your position, your status, and more about your ability and your competence. So here's an example of expert power.
Better start making sense. If you want to keep all that money, give it to your wife. The IRS allows a one-time only gift to your spouse for up to $60,000.
Bullshit. Tax-free? Tax-free. IRS can't touch 1 cent.
You're that smart banker what killed his wife, aren't you? Why should I believe a smart banker like you? So I can end up in here with you?
It's perfectly legal. Go ask the IRS. They'll say the same thing. Actually, I feel stupid telling you this. I'm sure you would have investigated the matter yourself.
Yeah, fucking I don't need no smart wife-killing banker to tell me where the bear shit in the buckwheat.
Of course not. But you do need someone to set up the tax-free gift for you. That'll cost you. A lawyer, for example.
Bunch of ball-washing bastards.
Right. I suppose I could set it up for you.
So here, this is from the movie Shawshank Redemption, and the Tim Robbins character wearing the newsboy hat, dangling over the side of a building, is a prisoner in jail. And so in order to avoid getting punished, he exerts his expert power, which is his banking, a lot of tax references today, but his skills for banking and the IRS and taxes, and it eventually gets him out of a position of trouble in the jail and into some power of his own that he leverages. And I won't say any more because I don't want to spoil it. So those are the 5 different types of power. A lot of examples today, a lot of case studies, and there's one more. So if you continue on in the module, you're going to learn about another case study, which is the People's Temple, which you have probably heard about. And if you haven't, you maybe have heard this phrase, don't drink the Kool-Aid, and that is going to come from this example. So thank you for listening. Continue on with the module, and good luck.